How well do you know God? Well, we have a prospect of eternal life from knowing God. It means everlasting life to know or take in knowledge of God and his Son, Jesus Christ. Shall we have a look at the scriptural principle here in John chapter 17, verse 3? So that's John chapter 17, verse 3. This means everlasting life. They're coming to know you, the only true God, and the one whom you sent, Jesus Christ. Now, Jesus must have meant more than one's having knowledge that God exists. Now, merely having some knowledge of Jehovah and claiming to worship him was not enough to make Samaritans acceptable to God. Shall we have a look at John chapter 4, verses 7 to 26? So that's John chapter 4, and we're looking at verses 7 to 26. A woman of Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink," for his disciples had gone off into the city to buy food. So the Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, despite being a Jew, ask me for a drink, even though I am a Samaritan woman?" For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. In answer, Jesus said to her, "If you had known of the free gift of God, and who it is who says to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." She said to him, "Sir, you do not even have a bucket for drawing water, and the well is deep. From what source, then, do you have this living water? You are not greater than your forefather Jacob, who gave us the well, and who, together with his sons and his cattle, drank out of it, are you?" In answer, Jesus said to her, "Everyone drinking from this water will get thirsty again. Whoever drinks from the water that I will give him will never get thirsty at all, but the water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water, bubbling up to impart everlasting life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water, so that I may neither thirst nor keep coming over to this place to draw water." He said to her, "Go, call your husband and come to this place." The woman replied, "I do not have a husband." Jesus said to her, "You are right in saying, 'I do not have a husband,' for you have 5 husbands, and the man you have now is not your husband. This you have said truthfully." The woman said to him, "Sir, I see that you are a prophet. Our forefathers worshipped on this mountain, but you people say that in Jerusalem is the place where people must worship." Jesus said to her, "Believe me, woman, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, because salvation begins with the Jews. Nevertheless, the hour is coming, and it is now, when the true worshippers will worship the Father with spirit and truth. For indeed, the Father is looking for ones like these to worship him. God is a spirit, and those worshipping him must worship with spirit and truth." The woman said to him, "I know that Messiah is coming, who is called Christ. Whenever that one comes, he will declare all things to us openly." Jesus said to her, "I am he, the one speaking to you." So there's some quite interesting points in that, in just that Bible reading alone, isn't there? Now, if you just pay attention there to verse 22, it says, "You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, because salvation begins with the Jews." So obviously just having a basic knowledge wasn't enough. You needed to have a full knowledge of Jehovah and Jesus and to be doing the will of God. Now, similarly, many today do not know God's name, and they confuse God with his Son even. Now ask yourself, do I know God and his Son in the sense needed to have firm prospect of eternal life? And how can we know God in this sense? And how can we help our children and Bible students to do so? So what does knowing a person involve? Well, truly knowing someone means more than merely believing that he exists. Knowing someone means perceiving his identity and being acquainted with his personality, his feelings. Now, this requires intimate acquaintance and experience over a period of time. An Amalekite who claimed that he had killed Saul certainly did not know David. Let's have a look at 2 Samuel chapter 1. So 2 Samuel, I'm looking at chapter 1 there. And we're going to look at verses 1 to 16. After Saul's death, when David had returned from defeating the Amalekites, David stayed at Ziklag for 2 days. On the third day, a man came from the camp of Saul with his garments ripped apart and dirt on his head. When he approached David, he fell down to the ground and prostrated himself. David asked him, "Where are you coming from?" He replied, "I have escaped from the camp of Israel." David asked him, "How did things turn out? Please tell me." To this he said, "The people have fled from the battle, and many have fallen and died. Even Saul and his son Jonathan have died." Then David asked the young man who brought him the news, "How do you know that Saul and his son Jonathan are dead?" The young man replied, "By chance I was on Mount Gilboa, and there was Saul supporting himself on his spear, and the chariots and the horsemen had caught up with him. When he turned around and saw me, he called me, and I said, 'Here I am.' He asked me, 'Who are you?' I replied, 'I am an Amalekite.' Then he said, 'Please stand over me and put me to death, for I am in great agony, but I am still alive.' So I stood over him and put him to death, and I knew that he could not survive after he had fallen down wounded. Then I took the crown that was on his head and the bracelet that was on his arm, and I brought them here to my lord." At this, David took hold of his garments and ripped them apart, and so did all the men who were with him. And they wailed and wept and fasted until evening for Saul, for his son Jonathan, for the people of Jehovah, and for the house of Israel, because they had all fallen by the sword. David asked for the young man who brought him the news, "Where are you from?" He said, "I am the son of a foreign resident, an Amalekite." Then David said to him, "Why did you not fear to lift your hand to do away with the anointed of Jehovah?" With that, David called one of the young men and said, "Step forward and strike him." So he struck him down, and he died. David said to him, "Your blood is on your own head, because your own mouth testified against you by saying, 'I myself put the anointed of Jehovah to death.'" So he certainly didn't know David at all, did he? Now, he did not know David's view of God's anointed one. Now, we might wonder, how can I get to know Jehovah? Does he not say that his ways and thoughts are vastly higher than ours? Well, let's have a look at Isaiah 55, verses 8 and 9. Isaiah chapter 55. "For my thoughts are not your thoughts," says chapter 8 there, "and your ways are not my ways, declares Jehovah. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so my ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." So, yes, true. Jehovah's ways and thoughts are vastly higher than ours. But the words in Isaiah 55 were to backsliding apostate Jews who left God's ways. Even they could return to Jehovah and come to know him again. Let's just have a look at verses 6 and 7. "Search for Jehovah while he may be found. Call to him while he is near. Let the wicked man leave his way, and the evil man his thoughts. Let him return to Jehovah, who will have mercy on him. To our God, for he will forgive in a large way." So, but in what ways might we search for and come to know him? Well, how and why can humans get to truly know God? Well, one way that we can come to know him is by striving to imitate him. Now, it is possible to imitate him, and that is his will for us. Let's have a look at Genesis chapter 1, for example. So right to the very beginning of the Bible there, we'll look at chapter 1, verses 26 to 28. What does that tell us here? Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have in subjection the fish of the sea, and flying creatures of the heavens, and domestic animals, and all the earth, and every creeping animal that is moving on the earth." And God went on to create the man in his image. In God's image he created him, male and female he created them. Further, God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and become many, fill the earth and subdue it, and have in subjection the fish of the sea, and the flying creatures of the heavens, and every living creature that is moving on the earth." So we see there, there's a couple of references there. First in 26 it says, "Let us make man in our image." And then a little bit further on in verse 27 it says, "And God went on to create the man in his image." So we see there, don't we, that we can imitate Jehovah to a certain degree. Now let's just compare that with Colossians chapter 3, verse 10. So that's Colossians. I'm looking at chapter 3, verse 10. "And clothe yourselves with the new personality, which through accurate knowledge is being made new according to the image of the one who created it." So there again, that's we find in the scriptures there that we can imitate our Father Jehovah. So good qualities that we manifest, such as love, mercy, wisdom, justice, and so forth, are mere reflections of him. And when we forgive another, we are reflecting God's ways. For example, let's have a look at Ephesians chapter 4, just a few pages back there. So that's Ephesians chapter 4, and let's read together from verse 32 there. "But become kind to one another, tenderly compassionate, freely forgiving one another, just as God, also by Christ, freely forgave you. Therefore become imitators of God as beloved children, and go on walking in love, just as Christ also loved us, and gave himself for us as an offering and a sacrifice, and a sweet fragrance to God." Now, sin mars man's reflection of God. And yet, the more we know him, the more that we can reflect Jehovah's glory. Now, let's have a look at 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 18. Again, just a few pages back there. So that's 2 Corinthians chapter 3. And looking at verse 18, the very last verse there. "And all of us, while we were unveiled faces, reflect like mirrors the glory of Jehovah, are transformed in the same image from one degree of glory to another, exactly as it is done by Jehovah the Spirit." Now, the Bible helps us to know him in terms that we can grasp. Though he is a spirit, Jehovah is spoken of as having eyes, ears, and even a face. Now, for example here, let's have a look at 1 Peter. 1 Peter and chapter 3. And we'll look at verse 12 of chapter 3 there. "For the eyes of Jehovah are on the righteous, and his ears listen to their supplication. But the face of Jehovah is against those doing bad things." So we see there, don't we? Now, using these human expressions help us to comprehend And also the description in spirit terms would be like trying to describe colours to one who had been born blind. Now, the Bible's description of Jehovah's feelings and reactions help us to get to know him. Let's have a look at Psalm 78. Psalm 78. And shall we read together verses 36 to 41? But they tried to deceive him with their mouth and lied to him with their tongue. Their heart was not steadfast toward him, and they were not faithful to his covenant. But he was merciful. He would forgive their error and not bring them to ruin. He often held back his anger instead of stirring up all his wrath. For he remembered that they were flesh, a wind that blows past and does not return. How often they rebelled against him in the wilderness and made him feel hurt in the desert. Again and again they put God to the test, and they grieved the Holy One of Israel. So we see there, don't we, that Jehovah has feelings, and also his reactions also tell us a lot about him, that he has qualities of mercy and forgiveness. So he is not like us, or rather shows how much we are in his image. By studying the Bible then, we can come to know God, his deeds, his purposes, his qualities, and his feelings that we've just seen there. Now, it is a challenge when reading and studying, not just to get facts, but to know God. So when you teach the Bible to others, do you call attention to what the material reveals about God himself? We can be helped to know God by having a personal relationship with him. And it can be illustrated in God's comment that he became acquainted with Abraham based on their dealings. Let's just have a look at Genesis chapter 18, verse 19. So back to Genesis there, we'll have a look at chapter 18 and verse 19. For I have come to know him in order that he may command his sons and his household after him to keep Jehovah's way by doing what is right and just, so that Jehovah may bring about what he has promised concerning Abraham. Now, similarly, Abraham had to come to know God and was sure of his love, his mercy, and his justice. If you're still in Genesis 18 there, let's just have a look at verse 25. It is unthinkable that you would act in this manner by putting the righteous man to death with the wicked one, so that the outcome for the righteous man and the wicked is the same. It is unthinkable of you. Will the judge of all the earth not do what is right? So we see there that Abraham had a certain degree of knowledge there about Jehovah, didn't he? So by regularly talking to God in prayer about matters of concern and by seeking his guidance, we come to know him better. Now, to know Jehovah God also means recognizing his position and authority and acting in harmony with what we know of him, just like Abraham really did that in verse 25. Now, regarding the Hebrew term for knowledge, with reference to knowing God, the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament says, it is thus respectful and obedient acknowledgement of the power and grace and demand of God. Now, this means that knowledge is not thought of in terms of a possession of information. It is possessed only in its exercise. And that you find in Volume 1, page 698. Now, Jehovah rejected the Israelites for their lack of knowledge, or that is, recognition and obedience. Let's just have a look at Hosea chapter 4, verses 1 and 6. Now, if you're not quite sure where Hosea is, it's one of the smaller books just before Matthew. So that's Hosea. And we're going to look at chapter 4, verses 1 and 6. So in verse 1 it tells us, "Hear the word of Jehovah, O people of Israel, for Jehovah has a legal case against the inhabitants of the land, because there is no truth, nor loyal love, nor knowledge of God in that land." So verse 6, "My people will be silent because there is no knowledge, because you have rejected knowledge. I will also reject you from serving as my priest, and because you have forgotten the law of your God, I myself will forget your sons." Now, just keep your finger in there because we're going to be returning back to Hosea in a second. But obviously, they knew who God was, but they did not act accordingly. Let's just have a quick glance at verse 2, shall we? It says there, "False oaths and lying and murder and stealing and adultery are widespread. And the one act of bloodshed follows another act of bloodshed." So we see the condition, what was going on there, don't we? Now, how far removed that is from Jehovah's personality. Now, history proved that they belied their claim stated at Hosea chapter 8, verse 2. So let's just turn over a few pages. And we're looking at chapter 8, verse 2. "To me they cry out, 'My God, we, Israel, know you.'" But did they? So, does this not emphasize to us that we need more than head knowledge? Our lives should manifest our knowing God. So we've seen that humans can know God, and ways they do this is by learning about him, having a relationship with him, and recognizing his authority and acting accordingly. But the vital questions are, how can I be sure that I personally know God? Are there reliable indications? Well, you need to examine yourself to see how well you know God. And one criterion of how well you know God is whether he recognizes you with approval. Now, God's knowing someone often means granting recognition to that one as approved, as acceptable and worthy of his attention. Now, just a few pages on from Hosea, let's have a look at Amos, just after Joel there. So that's Amos chapter 3. We're going to look at, and we're going to read together verses 1 and 2. So that's Amos 3, verses 1 and 2. It says, "Hear this word that Jehovah has spoken concerning you, O people of Israel, concerning the whole family that I brought up out of the land of Egypt. You alone I have known out of all the families of the earth. That is why I will call you to account for all your errors. Will two walk together unless they have agreed to meet?" Now, the converse is also true. A person is not known if God and Jesus do not recognize or approve of him. Let's have a look at Matthew chapter 7. So the book of Matthew, and we're looking at chapter 7. And we'll read together verses 21 to 23. "Not everyone saying to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter into the kingdom of the heavens, but it is the one doing the will of my Father who is in the heavens will. Many will say to me in that day, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and expel demons in your name, and perform many powerful works in your name?' And then I will declare to them, 'I never knew you. Get away from me, you workers of lawlessness.'" So consequently, for you to know God fully, he must first know you. Now let's have a look at Galatians chapter 4, verses 8 and 9. So that's Galatians chapter 4, verses 8 and 9. So verse 8 then, it says, "Nevertheless, when you did not know God, you were enslaved to those who are not really God's. But now that you have come to know God, or rather have come to be known by God, How is it that you are turning back to the weak and beggarly elementary things and want to slave for them over again? So, one turning to God with faith in him and on the basis of a ransom can come to be known or recognized. So by growing in faith and avoiding lawlessness, you can continue to be known by God. Another gauge of how well you know God is whether you lovingly obey his commands. Now let's have a look at 1 John chapter 2. So that's 1 John chapter 2. And we're looking at verses 3 to 6 there. And by this we realize that we have come to know him, namely, if we continue observing his commandments. The one who says, I have come to know him, and yet does not observe his commandments, is a liar, and the truth is not in this person. So they're very direct words there, aren't they? Now, if in his heart a person thinks he can obey one command, such as by preaching, but ignore the others, such as by engaging in loose conduct, fraud, or lying, etc., he does not know God or Jesus. He is a liar. Now, one sincerely trying to obey all God-given commands is coming to know God. Other commands of a more personal nature are equally important if one is to know God well. Now, the husband, you are commanded to love your wife as your own body and not to be harsh or demanding. And we see that, don't we, from Ephesians chapter 5, verse 28. But if you as a husband treat your wife kindly and patiently without showing irritation, it is an indication that you know God, who gave you such direction. And as for the wife, you are commanded to have respect for your husband, even though he may not completely live up to your expectations. Now, you find that, don't you, in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 33. But showing respect evidences that you are coming to know God, who has clearly set forth the principle of relative subjection. Now, young Christians also, you show a desire to know God by obeying your parents, as he commands in Ephesians chapter 6, verses 1 and 2. Now, by obeying parents' rules that do not break God's law, you advance toward knowing God. When you strive to avoid unchristian association, you indicate that you know God. If we choose unchristian associates, God cannot associate with us. Now let's have a look at Psalm 15, verses 1 to 5. Psalm 15, verses 1 to 5. O Jehovah, who may be a guest in your tent? Who may reside in your holy mountain? Here it is. The one who is walking faultlessly, practicing what is right, and speaking the truth in his heart. He does not slander with his tongue. He does nothing bad to his neighbor. He does not defame his friends. He rejects anyone who is contemptible. But he honors those fearing Jehovah. He does not go back on his promise, even when it is bad for him. He does not lend his money on interest, and he does not accept a bribe against the innocent. Whoever does these things will never be shaken. So they're quite interesting words, aren't they? Now, by being very selective and associating with true Christians, you show that you know God. So we need to turn to God regularly in prayer, thus showing that you trust and know him. Now, one truly knowing God is aware that he welcomes our prayers. Any fear of approaching him is thus cast out. Do your prayers indicate that you know God? You can come to know him more by increasing the regularity and intimacy of your prayers to him. Now, if you sin, as we all do, show you know and trust God by bringing it up in prayer, seeking and accepting forgiveness. Let's have a look at, again, Psalms, but this time chapter 26. So that's Psalms 26. And we'll pay attention to verses 1 and 2 together there. Judge me, O Jehovah, for I have walked in my integrity. In Jehovah I have trusted without wavering. Examine me, O Jehovah, and put me to the test. Refine my innermost thoughts and my heart. But is knowing God just something between the two of you, or is more involved? Well, we need to help others to join us in knowing God well. As noted, we can help others know God by emphasizing his requirements, his purposes, and his qualities. Now, this applies now when many are worshipping man-made peace organizations. But some people know the basic Bible stories, but can you impart to them understanding, perhaps helping them to truly come to know God? Now, in preaching and teaching, call attention to reasons why God acted in the past as he did, and encourage confidence in his future actions based on his qualities exemplified in his past dealings. By living daily by Bible principles and standards, we help others to see the advisability of coming to know God and to serve him well. Paul said that Jehovah makes the knowledge of him perceptible through us in every place. And you find that in 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 14. Now, the knowledge is spread by the way that Christians live. Isn't example by example always a good teacher? Well, it very much is, isn't it? And, exercising knowledge and reflecting its good effects and displaying the new personality really works. Now, we can confidently urge others to take up true worship, coming to know Jehovah and having part in his purposes. Let's have a look at 1 Chronicles chapter 28, verse 9. So that's 1 Chronicles. And we're going to look at chapter 28, verse 9 there. And you, Solomon, my son, know the God of your father, and serve him with a complete heart and with a delightful soul. For Jehovah searches through all hearts, and he discerns every inclination of the thoughts. If you search for him, he will let himself be found by you. But if you leave him, he will reject you forever. So now and in the future, we will not have mere head knowledge of the path of life, but will know by experience that pleasant path. Now, the Bible assures us that the knowledge of God will fill the earth. Now, does that not mean just information, but exercise of knowledge by doing his will because of knowing him? Let's have a look at Isaiah chapter 11, verse 9. So that's Isaiah chapter 11, verse 9. They will not cause any harm or any ruin in my holy mountain, because the earth will certainly be filled with the knowledge of Jehovah, as the waters cover the sea. So truly, there is reason for satisfaction and pleasantness in knowing Jehovah and the path of life. This is the knowledge that leads to everlasting life. So I'll leave you now with a question. How well do you know God? If you'd like a free home Bible study at a time and place to suit you, please navigate your browser to jw.org and follow the links online. Thank you for listening.